South and learn about this crucial vote for Cuba's democracy. Watch Cuba Votes, only on Telesur, the news source from Latin America and the Caribbean.
From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. The president of Ecuador has announced a bailout agreement with the IMF for $4.2 billion. In a brief television message, Lenin Moreno said the loan from the International Monetary Fund was part of a larger package aimed at dealing with Ecuador's growing deficit. In recent weeks, trade unions and other movements have repeatedly protested against government cuts, higher gas prices, and plans to privatize public companies.
We are going to receive $10 billion. What great news. At an average interest that doesn't go over 5% with a 30-year term. $6 billion will come from the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the CAF Andean Development Bank, the European Investment Bank, the Latin American Reserve Fund, and the French Agency for Development. $4.2 billion of the funds will come from the International Monetary Fund, of which we reached an agreement on staff levels.
Earlier in the day, President Moreno signed up a manifesto on press freedom promoted by Latin America's big private media. He endorsed the Chapultepec Declaration in the presence of the president of the Inter-American Press Association and said he preferred excesses in media than a gag on press freedom. Moreno has rolled back many of the protections included in the previous government's media law. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has presented his flagship pension reform to Congress on Wednesday. Speaking on TV, he said it would save $300 billion over 10 years and it will be fair to all. But across the country, thousands of workers protested against this plan.
The new pension reform will be fair for all. There will be no privileges. Rich and poor, civil servants, politicians, private sector workers, everybody will follow the same rules as regards age and contribution time.
Protests took place in cities across Brazil on Wednesday against far-right President Jair Bolsonaro's proposed pension reforms, which, if passed, will deny millions of Brazilians the right to retire and lower minimum monthly payments below the minimum wage.
The way the reforms are being done in Brazil, without consulting the workers and without charging the ones who really owe them money, which are the banks and many companies, it makes it difficult to believe that these reforms will benefit the workers.
Thousands of representatives of Brazil's union confederations traveled from across Brazil to participate in a general workers' assembly on Praça de Sé in downtown São Paulo to vote on what the next steps will be to fight the measure, which was introduced to Congress on Wednesday.
The decision made today in the General Assembly was for all of the union confederations to unite against retirement reform. And we have made a call for all unions and social movements to put pressure on lawmakers in their communities, at the airports and in Brasilia, so that this reform, which will destroy workers' rights, does not pass.
After the parliamentary coup of 2016, President Michel Temer tried and failed to pass neoliberal pension reforms after the unions united to hold general strikes, street protests, and to put pressure on lawmakers. The decision approved in the assembly in São Paulo calls for building a plan of action within the next week and opens the door for another general strike.
We need a lot of unity right now. The job of union directors is not to fight for their individual labor category at this moment. We need unity. We have to get together. If we don't unite, then we're finished.
Brian Mir, Telesur, São Paulo.
Venezuela's vice president has announced the closing of maritime and aerial borders with the Dutch Caribbean islands of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao. This comes after the government of Curaçao agreed to serve as a collection center for the so-called humanitarian aid. Our correspondent in Caracas, Luis Tavera, has the details.
Te saludo a ti también, Andrea, la audiencia que sintoniza las pantallas.
The Venezuelan vice president announced the closure of maritime and aerial borders with the islands of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao. Delcy Rodriguez said that the decision was taken to protect the self-determination and sovereignty of the Venezuelan people. She also said that Venezuela and Curaçao had good bilateral relationships in the past, so she does not understand why the island has decided to join the campaign to undermine the Venezuelan government. The vice president also said that the so-called humanitarian aid coming from the U.S. is hypocritical, since on the one hand, they have blockaded at least $30 billion that belong to Venezuela, and on the other, it pretends to give a mere $20 million as humanitarian help. She also said that U.S. plans to intervene in Venezuela have failed. People continue holding mobilizations in Venezuela to support the government of President Nicolás Maduro.
That was Luis Tavera from Caracas. And 7 foreigners arrested in Haiti have reportedly been transferred to the United States. The men, including 5 U.S. citizens, were arrested in Port-au-Prince and accused of conspiracy after they were found heavily armed near the central bank on Sunday. This as people are still recovering after weeks of protests.
7 heavily armed people have been under arrest in this police station. The U.S. Department of State identified 3 of the 5 United States citizens, among them as former U.S. soldiers. The Haitian government has denied any relationship with this armed group, but the current situation in the country creates skepticism about this statement.
Juvenals hired hitmen to kill us. We know that many people are involved in this.
The heavily armed foreigners, some of them linked to U.S. contractors, were traveling around the country carrying telecommunications equipment, tactical uniforms, and surveillance drones in cars without license plates.
These U.S. citizens have come to support the government with violence and crime because they saw that Haitian people are going further in their fight. People do not want to change their president, but change the whole system.
Several opposition parties gathered to release a statement in which they said that the reasons behind the protests are still valid, and they call for new demonstrations.
The data tells us everything. The president only had to do one thing, which was to show willingness and tell us where the money is. But he hasn't done that, so that only worsens things.
Ahead of those new demonstrations, thousands of people have returned to their regular jobs. They are driven by necessity in a country where 90% of economic activity is based on the black market.
The executive and legislative branches have brought the country to a real breakdown. The political leaders are totally dominated by a few families of the oligarchy and imperialism.
The protests that started on February 7th have left an impact on the country's schools. Some of them have restarted classes, but many are still closed.
The first presidential election debate has been held in Panama. The 7 candidates addressed a variety of issues, ranging from healthcare to the right to food security. Many of them agreed the country should invest in technology to boost the agricultural sector and that the healthcare should be a priority. Panama will hold the general elections on May 5.
In this country, people do not choose what to eat. Poor people eat what there is and when there is. That has to end. And the only way is by accompanying the national producer.
The Peruvian government has launched a military operation to tackle illegal mining, an industry that has created huge patches of desert in the Amazon region. Operation Mercury is aimed at tackling illegal mining in the region. Its name refers to the use of mercury by illegal gold miners that heavily pollutes the land and destroys its vegetation. Police estimate that about 31,000 people live illegally in the Tambopata Jungle Reserve, performing activities tied to illegal mining. More stories coming up. We'll be back.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on critical move. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. After months of public dialogues in communities, Cubans are set to vote on several constitutional reforms on Sunday. Among other things, these reforms are bringing together contributions to achieve gender equality.
Gypsy Moreno is a world champion, Olympic champion, and Pan American champion hammer thrower. For her, the new law of laws is an unprecedented leap in terms of women's rights in Cuba.
When we talk about violence against women, when we talk about the freedom that people have to express themselves and dress the way they choose, from the recognition of the rights of children to the rights of the old age, from the right as a woman so that you're not yelled at or mistreated, the ability to see yourself reflected, you wouldn't imagine what appears and is picked up in the Constitution. I think it's already giving us value and strength.
For Liriam Gordillo, a feminist who's an expert in gender and communication, the constitutional reform, just like any historical and cultural human process, has very positive results, but also shortcomings.
There is still resistance to an inclusive language in the Magna Carta. We can see how the titles and positions are still male. Domestic and unpaid work is not made visible, paid or unpaid. It doesn't take reproduction into consideration as an element which contributes to the national economy, and it does not appear anywhere within the document, and that's an area which is traditionally made invisible within a patriarchal conception.
Nevertheless, within the new Supreme Law, there are undeniable advances in the recognition of equality. It includes categories such as sexual orientation, ethnic origin, disability, age, and territorial origin. Gender violence is made visible as an issue which requires a comprehensive and integrated state response, and the right to make decisions over one's own body is affirmed.
The public debate over the constitutional reform also allows us to take a sort of map of the country. For example, it revealed the different actors and forces that today in Cuba are taking all sorts of points of views, including fundamentalist ideologies. Some of these are against equal marriage in the country, but they are also against gender perspectives in public policies and the full rights and participation of women. So I think it's very important, because this is a political and state response, to endorse within the Constitution the sexual and reproductive rights of women and for the state to protect these.
The consensus is that the new Magna Carta goes far beyond the 1976 Constitution in terms of gender.
Another element is the recognition and protection of paternity, and this is very important and is linked to the reconciliation of family and work life. The subject of motherhood has always been given weight, and that protection of maternity is maintained. But it's also necessary to give a space to the recognition of paternity, as childcare should be viewed as a shared responsibility of mothers and fathers.
In the opinion of this expert, it's a constitution that not only reflects the present in a more integral way, but is open to further developments in the future.
Several social movements in Colombia have called for a national strike on April. More than 300 social, indigenous, and Afro-Colombian organizations have come out in favor of the strike. They say the government has broken its agreements with various sectors of society. They also reject the interventionist policy of President Iván Duque towards Venezuela. They also reject obstacles for implementing peace accords. The leaders say the authorities have refused to negotiate.
We have also decided to campaign against their failure to fulfill their agreement, since this government has not wanted to talk or negotiate with the Colombian people's social movements. They are also against the implementation of the agreement signed with the FARC in Havana. As a social and popular movement, we have decided that date of the strike, and April 25th will be the beginning of the national strike.
The Mexican Navy has confiscated 630 kilograms of cocaine from a boat off the coast of Sinaloa State. According to the Naval Office, 15 people were arrested in the operation. The alleged traffickers with the seized narcotics and the boat have been handed over to the police. Complaints in Argentina are growing against the use of taser guns by security officials. Let's learn more.
Growing police repression against social movements in Argentina concerns many. Now, human rights organizations have requested reports from the government on their purchase of taser guns that security personnel use.
Bueno, nosotros hace...
For over 5 years, we have filed a legal request to ban the use of tasers by police. These guns produce an electric charge that has been described as torture by the United Nations Torture Committee.
Questions regarding the use of taser guns started in 2010, when social activists started a process to ban their use. They say the use of the weapon implies a torture, and they could also easily become lethal weapons. In addition, organizations have requested reports of personal training and of what protocols will be set up for the use of this weapon. They say its use violates human rights.
Mano libre el policía.
To give this to the police and allow them to be used freely is a human rights violation. This is an ongoing offense, not just to us, but to our children.
Human rights organizations have requested that the state take effective measures to avoid all kinds of human rights violations, as well as abuse or mistreatment by security forces.
Jamaica's government has allocated funds to upgrade the country's postal system. Over $35 million have been set aside. The project will increase the ability of Jamaica's post office to control and improve the mail system. Jamaica's postal system manages over 500 offices and agencies. In Brazil, samba schools in Rio de Janeiro are finishing their preparations for next week's carnival. Students added final touches to their carnival floats and their costumes for the day. Carnival in Brazil will begin on the 1st of March and will last for 5 days. This is one of the most famous carnivals around the world that is always seeking to innovate.
Samba schools have always been based on the idea of going down the parade avenue to be seen. I think it has to go beyond that. I think the format must be such that the audience is participating in the show in some way. And what I think is interesting for the show to be a surprise, to be novel, so people in attendance can feel some kind of excitement.
A giant turtle thought to be extinct has been discovered in Ecuador's Galapagos Island. The species was believed to have become extinct about a century ago. The 20-kilo female animal was found among the vegetation during a scientific expedition to the Fernandina Island. Its discovery has raised hopes of finding another specimen of this tortoise and so restoring its population.
Everybody's studying her, everybody's fascinated.
A raft entirely made of reeds is set to sail off from Chile in an attempt to reach Australia. The raft was built based on ancient Andean indigenous techniques, taking more than 3 years to complete. It will carry an international crew of 8, and if everything goes well, will reach Sydney in about 5 months. The 19-meter-long raft was built by Bolivian indigenous Aymara people who used to sail this kind of rafts on Lake Titicaca in ancient times.
The boat consists of just reeds from Lake Titicaca in Bolivia and Peru, wood, cotton sails, and rope. We have about 35 kilometers of rope inside this boat, in the entire vessel.
We're taking one last break. Stay with us.
Enjoy our programming from Monday to Friday, where you'll find the best information on culture, innovation, conservation, human well-being. Keep up to date on the latest innovations in science and technology with at the moon. The habits and knowledge you need to live a healthy lifestyle are on. Guide your body. Environmental consciousness is required to preserve our Earth. Undergo your transformation on Green Zone. All about equity, diversity, and respect for identities on By Gender. Cultural manifestations, they are in all its forms and the stories of real lives. Every day we feature a wide variety of content. Only on Telesur, the news source from Latin America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. At least 70 people have been killed in a fire in the Bangladeshi capital, Dhaka. The fire broke out in an apartment building in an old part of the city. The blaze spread quickly as the building was also used as a chemical warehouse. The causes of the incident are still unknown, but a witness claimed that a gas cylinder exploded in the back of a car. Police say the death toll is likely to rise as rescue workers have begun retrieving bodies from the building. Those injured and body bags with charred human remains have been taken to a nearby hospital, which is flocked by relatives looking for their missing loved ones. Attempts by Algeria's opposition parties to nominate a single candidate in the forthcoming elections have failed. The opposition met on Wednesday to discuss the possibility of forming an electoral alliance and a possible single candidacy. There has been calls for the opposition to achieve this in order to increase their chances against President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, who has been in power for the last 20 years. Presidential candidates in Senegal have held their final rallies in cities across the country, mobilizing supporters in stadiums and public squares ahead of Sunday's vote. President Macky Sall is seeking a second 5-year mandate. He will be facing off against 4 challengers, including a former prime minister. Senegal is one of Africa's most stable democracies.
He's a new man, and I think with him the country can develop, because we are tired of the president. It is Macky Sall or the others. It's time that we have a president that can develop Senegal.
And Nigeria is also heading to the polls. Their presidential election was postponed to February 23rd. We talked to Maberu, a lecturer from Nigeria, who gave us his take on the vote.
The political atmosphere right now seems to be very, very tense. And it seems to be very, very tense because members of the ruling class, members of the Nigerian ruling class, since the independence, since 1960, have ensured that whenever, we enter the electionary period, they tend to employ whatever means necessary, to get into power. So they get to entice people with money, they get to entice people with those that are not interested in money. They get to, come up with all sorts of violent, methods in order to ensure that they acquire that political power.
Trade unions and social movements in South Africa have described the budget announced by the finance minister as an attack on the poor and marginalized communities. The unions, led by the South African Federation of Trade Unions, marched to Parliament to express their rejection to the budget. The 2019 budget will see South Africans pay more for their fuel and other goods, following an increase in taxes. Performance bonuses for state workers have also been eliminated. Thousands of teachers in Morocco were repressed by government security forces as they demonstrated for higher pay and greater job security. Thousands of teachers had taken to the streets of capital Rabat to protest against fixed-term contracts, which have been enforced since 2016. The demonstrators held up banners that read, "No to fixed-term contracts," and no to the dismantling of public schools.
If we take a look at our claims, the choice of February 20th as a date is justified because we are a part of the Moroccan people. Our file is that of the Moroccan people. We campaign for public schools so that teaching becomes free of charge. This day is very symbolic because we are taking to the streets for the same reasons as the Moroccan people on February 20th, 2011.
Pope Francis has opened a summit to address the issue of sexual abuse by priests across the world. The 4-day-long conference gathers heads of Catholic bishops' conferences, Vatican officials, experts, and heads of religious orders. In his opening speech, Pope Francis said victims expect concrete and efficient actions to tackle the issue and not just mere condemnations. But some victims' groups have criticized the meeting, calling it a publicity stunt to clean the damaged image of the Church.
In the face of the scourge of sexual abuse by the churchmen to the detriment of minors, I have decided to meet you patriarchs, cardinals, archbishops, bishops, religious superiors, and leaders so that together we listen to the Holy Spirit and with docility, with its guidance, the holy people of God look at us and expect from us not simple and obvious condemnations, but concrete and effective measures to put in place.
And just ahead of the Vatican conference, 2 Spanish victims of clergy abuse have staged a protest to expose sexual abuse at Catalonia's Montserrat monastery. Standing with signs saying transparency and responsibility at Montserrat, the two men demanded that the local abbot be defrocked for covering up sexual abuses.
I knew Andrew Soler was dangerous and he had to be stopped in his tracks. So I told my story to Montserrat monk Joseph Maria San Roma, who then told the abbot at that time, Abbot Sebastian Maria Bardolet. Abbot Bardolet did not take any measures whatsoever. He didn't report him to the police. He didn't suspend him from his duties or remove him from the youth group. He didn't start a canonical trial. He didn't try to find new victims. He behaved like nothing had happened.
And for our last story, an immersive Van Gogh exhibition has kicked off in Paris. It displays 500 works of the Dutch artists that have been lightly animated, including its self-portraits. Visitors can almost feel every brushstroke made by the painter. The famous Starry Night is the main attraction of this exhibition. With that, we come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories from our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and also Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.